right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are in Petra, Jordan, that is. Question. If someone were to ever ask you, how do you know that God exists, what would you say? Creation. That's taught, of course, in the Bible. It's taught in Romans 1, also in Psalm 19. In Romans 1, Paul says that we are without excuse, that people are without excuse because God's invisible qualities and divine attributes are clearly seen by what has been made. His invisible qualities and divine attributes are clearly seen by what has been made. In other words, we know God by his effects. If there's a creation, and we can see creation all around us, then if you reason back from that effect, you have to go back to a creator, because every effect has a cause. This is a scientific principle, that every effect has a cause. One of the problems, of course, with atheism is they have no ultimate cause. We have all these effects and no cause if you're an atheist. So we reason from effect back to cause. If there's design in the universe, then you must reason back to a designer. The effect is design. You reason back to a cause, a designer. As we look at all these facades, all these carvings all around us here in Petra, this side, by the way, we're on is apparently, according to Omar, these are tombs, but that side, those are homes. When you look at the inscriptions there, you know that those are effects of an intelligent being. Why? Because you know that natural laws don't create these kinds of carvings in the side of a mountain. They're too precise. They're too specific. They are clear signs of intelligence. It's like if you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, John loves Mary. What are you going to say caused that? The wind and the rain? Crabs came out of the water and made that message? No, you're going to say that had to be an intelligent being that inscribed John loves Mary in the sand, because you know natural laws don't do that. Natural laws don't do this either. Natural laws just do the same thing over and over again. And if you allow natural laws enough time, as we can see here in Petra, they tend to erode things. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. Things go from order to disorder. You know, nature will take a building and turn it into a pile of bricks, but nature will never take a pile of bricks and turn it into a building. Everything goes from order to disorder naturally, without some sort of intelligent infusion of information. So when you look at creation, you reason back to your creator. You look at design, you reason back to a designer. All these tombs are designed with spectacular colors, by the way. Somebody designed them. Another evidence for God, and probably the most relevant today, is the moral argument. The idea that we have a moral law written on our hearts. We know certain things are objectively right and certain things are objectively wrong. Therefore, there must be a standard, a moral standard outside of ourselves that we're obligated to obey. The effect is the moral law that we have inscribed on our hearts. The cause is, who's going to inscribe a moral ought on people? Not nature. Nature can't do that. Nature has no authority to tell you what to do. Only a mind, a moral authority, has the capacity to tell you how to behave. So when we see awful things like someone assassinated, someone murdered, we know that's a violation of the moral law. When Charlie Kirk was murdered, we all intuitively understood this isn't right. When we say something isn't right, we're implying that something is right. Every negation implies an affirmation. If you say something's immoral, it means you know what is moral. If you know something is not right, it means you know what is right. And that standard, by the way, can only be God's nature. Because only God can cause us to be obligated to obey it. So we're reasoning from the effect of the moral law to a cause, a moral lawgiver. How about your capacity to reason? How about your capacity to know things that are outside of your skull that are true? You ever think about that? Like, why can this 3-pound brain that we all have tell us the truth of what's outside of our skulls? Why can you know that, say, 2 + 2 = 4? Or that the sun rises in the east? Or that God should have never created the Dallas Cowboys? Why do you know this? Because your mind can ascertain truths outside of yourself. And if there is an ability to reason, you have these laws of logic and laws of mathematics, and you can access them and discover truth outside of your mind, then there must be a source of this reason. There must be an ultimate mind. In fact, your mind is in effect made in the image of the great mind, God himself. How about the evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead? Who could cause somebody to see the future and then predict and accomplish his own resurrection from the dead? Natural laws can't do that. There must be a mind beyond this world that has the power to know the future and the power to resurrect someone from the dead. That's what we call God. So we're always reasoning from effect to cause, whether it's creation to a creator, design to a designer, a moral law to a moral lawgiver, reason to a mind, or a resurrection to someone who can resurrect the dead. You're always reasoning from effect to cause. In fact, even if you think you've had some sort of personal experience with God, say you think God's answered a prayer or something, you're doing the same thing. You're saying the effect is the answered prayer, and you're reasoning back to a cause. You're saying God caused this. That's how we know that God exists. If we can't depend on cause and effect, we have no capacity to know basically that anything's true, including whether God exists or not. But the very ground of science that so many people in our culture worship today is the law of causality. That every effect has a cause. Doesn't say everything has a cause. Every effect has a cause. There has to be something out there that's not an effect. There has to be something out there whose essence equals his existence, who didn't have a beginning. And as you know, not only from Genesis 1, but even from the evidence from the natural world, that the universe had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, if space-time and matter had a beginning, as even atheists will admit today, then what could have caused that? Only something outside of space-time and matter, right? Something spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only a mind can make a choice. The being, the cause, would also have to have intelligence to be able to make a choice. So, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think about when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause? Who do you think of? God. You say, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't, just from the argument from the beginning of the universe, but after you look at the evidence for Jesus rising from the dead, then you can go back and say that the same being that created space, matter, and time is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. 1,992 years ago is about the time he walked out of the tomb. That being, his divine nature created the universe out of nothing. By the way, think about the attributes for God, a few of them. Spaceless, timeless. If you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No, you're uncaused. So this answers the age-old question, who made God? The answer is no one. God is unmade. You don't ask who made the unmade creator, right? He is the first cause. He is the ground of all being. His existence and his essence are the same He's always existed outside of time, and he created time, and we're inside of time. And how can he know? How can he predict the future? Because he's outside of time. He can see how the whole thing's going to wind up because he can see it all at once. He just knows. He doesn't reason in sequential steps to discover what's going to happen. He just knows it intuitively all at once. So as we look around this creation, we know there's got to be a creator. And when we look at specific things in the creation, we know that's the product of intelligence. So when we put all this together, and we put together the evidence for the resurrection, we realize that the best explanation for why we exist and why we're here on earth is to know that God through Jesus and to make him known. That's why we're here. That's why we do these trips. It's not just a good time. It's so you can know God for who he is through Christ, the Savior, and then make him known. So now you guys can go back, we can all go back to where we live and plant seeds in people to say, do you know why you're here? You're here to know Jesus and to make him known. As Charlie Kirk would say, to make heaven crowded. That's why we're here. All right, any questions on any of that?
What about the aliens?
What about the aliens? Good question, Pastor. The pastor brings up the alien question. Look, even if there are aliens, what does that tell us?
God created them too.
Someone had to create them too, because aliens are not outside of time. Aliens are inside of time. Aliens are created beings if they exist at all. You know, sometimes I get the question, do you think there's intelligent life out there? And my answer is, I don't even know if there's intelligent life here, right? Given what's going on.
Yeah, I hear you.
So yeah, even if there are aliens, in fact, it's interesting that some atheists like Richard Dawkins and others in the past have suggested, because they can't explain how life began, they've suggested something known as panspermia, which means seeds everywhere. That some alien seeded this planet with life. Now, there's no evidence for this. However, even if there were aliens that seeded this planet for life, it doesn't explain the origin of the alien or the universe, right? You need a universe to have life anyway. Where did the whole show come from? So it, at best, even if true, just puts the question back a step. Who created them? When you get to God, you can't go back a step because he's outside of time. He doesn't have a beginning. He's the uncaused first cause. He would be what Aristotle would call the unmoved mover. And by the way, you know, Aristotle thought the universe was eternal, but it didn't matter for Aristotle. He said, even if it is eternal, there has to be a being outside the universe that keeps it going. Like, why do natural laws do what they do over and over again, repeatedly? Because there's a mind behind it all, keeping it going. So Aristotle's unmoved mover would still, even if the universe is eternal, would still need a cause outside of itself to keep everything going.
So how do we fit that back into the Bible, that there might be an earth that's 500 million, 2 billion years old?
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible is true, inerrant, but yet we have this science, and the evidence seems to be many, that there's the age of the earth and the age of these creatures that lived before man.
All right, that's a great question. When people ask me how old the earth is, I say I'm absolutely convinced the earth is at least 63 years old. I'm going to throw my mom in there, it's at least 87 years old, all right? Because Christians will argue over this. Is the Bible teaching a young earth? And if it is, what about the evidence from the natural law or the natural world that suggests the earth is older or the universe is older? And Christians will argue over it. But let me point this out. What does the first verse of the Bible say? In the beginning, what? God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, when did he create it? In the beginning. Does it say when? No. What does the next verse say? This is the Bible, ladies and gentlemen. What does Genesis 1:2 say? And the earth was formless and void. Okay, first verse says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. There's no Hebrew word for universe, so heavens and earth meant the universe. The next verse, suddenly we're down to earth, and the earth was formless and void. How long did that take? Does it say? It doesn't say. The days don't begin till verse 3. And by the way, the days are beginning in verse 3 before the sun has been made. How are you supposed to have days, 24-hour days, before the sun has been made? John Lennox, who teaches at Oxford University, Christian philosopher, mathematician, wrote a book called 7 Days That Divide the World, and here's basically his conclusion. The Bible leaves the age of the earth indeterminate. Why? It says the heavens and the earth are created in verse 1. Verse 2, earth. Then the days begin. How long did that take? We don't know. By the way, is the Bible written to you or for you? It's written for you. Who is Genesis written to? Who is it written to?
Israelites in the Exodus.
Israelites, they had just left Egypt. It's the Exodus, right? They're getting out of 400 years of slavery. What questions are they asking as they're walking through the desert? Do you think they're walking through the desert going, I wonder how old this place is? Right? No, that's not their question. What's their question? Who is the true God? Is Yahweh the true God, or are the gods of Egypt the true gods? And there are scholars now who are saying that Genesis 1 is a polemic, a corrective on what they had believed in Egypt. In other words, Egypt, in fact, maybe Omar said this yesterday, it took, 2 days to get Israel out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel, right? They had all these beliefs from being in Egypt for so long. So Moses comes along, and through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he says, the gods of Egypt, they didn't create the universe. Because the Egyptian creation story, they have these gods, they're like superheroes, they just kind of exist. They're not explained where they come from, they're inside the universe, and they have to fight one another in order to bring order to chaos. Moses comes along, he says, no, God's outside the universe, he just speaks, and he brings order to chaos. He doesn't have to fight anybody. He's the God of the universe. And so this is a corrective to the people at the time. They need that question answered. They don't care how old, why, what does it matter, right? How old, in fact, it doesn't matter today how old the universe is, because you need a cause no matter how far back you go. Whether it's billions of years or thousands of years, it doesn't really matter, does it? You still need a cause. You still need God to create the universe and sustain the universe no matter how old it is. So the Bible was not written to you, it was written for you, and for you to know what it means, you got to put yourself back in the mindset of to whom it was written, to understand why it was written that way. So, and by the way, in order for you to understand the Bible, you have to take knowledge from outside the Bible to know it. Like you have to know language, right? You have to know grammar. You have to know something about history. You have to know something about cause and effect. In fact, you have to know something about this idea of God, because how does the Bible start? In the beginning, God. Who's God? It's not even explained, right? It presupposes that you have some prior information about what the scriptures are talking about. This is in theology called prolegomena. It means what you do before you do theology. You have to know reason, you have to know logic, you have to know grammar, you have to know something a little bit about history, you have to know about cause and effect. Because people will say, I just trust the Bible, whatever the Bible. Yeah, but you're bringing information to the text in order to understand what it means. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How do you know from the Bible that the earth goes around the sun rather than the sun going around the earth? You don't. When you get information from outside the Bible, this is called natural revelation. We might say God has two revelations. He has his works, that's natural revelation. And then he has his word, that's special revelation, that's the Bible. In order for you to understand special revelation, you have to know something about natural revelation. In order for you to understand his word, you have to know something about his works. So when you look out at the universe and you look at nature and you eventually realize that we're going around the sun's not going around us. When we then look at the Bible, we say the Bible is using observational language. And we do that today, even in our very modern society, right? When you watch the weather report at night, the meteorologist is going to go, sunrise tomorrow at 6:41. He's not going to say Earth rotation will become apparent at 6:41, right? He's using observational language. The Bible uses observational language. It talks to us just like we talk to one another. But if we want to know something technical, we often get information from outside the Bible to interpret the Bible properly. There's nothing illegitimate about that. In fact, it's impossible to not do that. Everybody's doing that. Does that make sense, Boudreaux?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Anybody else?
If you want to know the author best, read both his books, not
That's
just one, right?
If you want to know the author best, read both his books. The book of his works, that includes science and nature and all that, and the book of his word, right?
Got one more, Frank.
Yeah, go ahead.
Regardless of the age of the earth,
Uh-huh.
is it essential that Adam and Eve were real people?
The question is, regardless of the age of the earth, is it essential that Adam and Eve were real people? I would say yes. Why? Because without them, without their sin, Adam is or Paul says the first Adam is Adam, and because of his sin, the entire human race has been tainted, and Christ is the second Adam, the last Adam who takes that sin away from us. So yes. And by the way, that seems to be makes the most sense to me. How was Adam created? Right out of the dust, right? It certainly makes more sense than some sort of premortal slime, whatever that means, and all these natural laws got together and somehow created this. Do you know that right now, the origin of life science is in an absolute crisis for the naturalist. James Tour down there at Rice University just challenges these people all the time. He says, you don't have any idea how natural laws could create life. And by the way, when we say that natural laws can't create life, it's not what we call a God of the gaps argument. You know what God of the gaps is? You can't find a natural cause, so you plug God in to explain it, and then you later realize, oh no, we were wrong, the natural laws can do it. That's not what we're doing here. Why? Like, for example, one of the things in life is DNA, the genetic code. All life has DNA. Where do codes come from? They come from coders, right? Programs come from programmers. Messages come from minds. We know that. These are messages out here. They're messages. Even though it might not be an inscription, but a carving is a message, right? It's telling you something. There are wings up there. What is that telling you? Or we saw camel earlier inscribed in there. That's a message. Messages come from minds. So when you see a message, you don't just lack a natural explanation for that. That's positive, empirically verifiable evidence for a mind, for an intelligent cause. So we're not arguing from what we don't know. We're arguing from what we do know. We know that every time we see a message, we know it must come from a mind. So if you see a message in the simplest life, what should that tell you? It had to have come from a mind. And by the way, DNA is just one aspect of what we call evidence for intelligence in life. That's just one. There are all sorts of other aspects about life that require intelligence, whether the organization of the cell, the epigenetic information in the cell, how the cell works together. I mean, doctors know this. Dr. David here, you look at living things and you go, there is just no way this could come together by the four natural forces. What are the four natural forces? The only four forces we know about. No, not a woman scorned. Nice. The four natural forces: gravity, the strong and weak nuclear forces, and electromagnetic radiation. Though the atheists, first of all, they can't explain where those four forces came from and that the universe came from, but even if they could, how do those four forces give you a message? Like in every one of your 40 trillion cells is a message that's 3.2 billion letters long. In DNA, ACTG, G, the four letters of the genetic alphabet. Where does that come from? It can only come from a mind. Just like John loves Mary, it can only come from a mind. It doesn't happen by natural forces. None of these inscriptions happen by natural forces. They all come from a mind. So it's not a God of the gaps argument. We're saying that's positive evidence for a mind.
We can counter by saying, if you're going to suppose that we can get intelligent results from non-intelligence, you haven't demonstrated that that's ever been possible.
Yes.
We can demonstrate time and again, experimentally through lab science, that intelligent results can be brought about by intelligent causes. And so we've got all of the evidence in our favor in that regard, because there's never been this robust kind of intelligence information that's been produced without a mind as a cause. And so we really have the science on our side there.
We do. And unless that's the case, then again, unless there is cause and effect, we can't know anything about anything. Go ahead, Tanya.
What about cavemen?
Like how far back do men go?
Yeah,
that's
evolution.
Yeah, that's a big point of dispute even among Christians, but thousands of years, not millions.
Yeah.
Okay, so thousands, maybe tens of thousands, tops of hundreds, thousands, but it changes all the time. There's one thing that seems to change all the time is this evidence from genetics. 10 years ago, people said, oh no, it couldn't come from Adam and Eve. You had to have more than two people. Now people are saying, oh no, maybe it did come from just two people. It keeps changing.
Yeah.
So that whole area of science is very fluid, it seems. And science by nature is tentative, because you can always get new information that'll bring forth new results. There's many scientific theories, as you know, have been overturned over the years because new information has come in. So it's very tentative in that regard.